This is Terry Niemeyer at Bertrand Farm and taking you through the last step of sap to syrup production, home production. If you recall in previous blogs, we said we need a good 40 to 50 gallons of sap to boil it down to 1 gallon of maple syrup. So we've boiled all the sap down to about 1.5 gallons outside of the house. And once we get down to the last 1.5 gallons, we bring it in the house so we can keep a better eye on it because it's going to boil a lot faster. And we need to get it up to a temperature of about 219 degrees. So we have the candy thermometer in it. And once it gets up to 219, it's a good rolling boil, and that's what thickens it. And then before we know it's ready, we want to test the density of the syrup because we don't want it to be too runny. So the next step, and I think this is ready, so I'm going to take it off. I'm going to take it right off the stove and bring it over here. And oh, you see it's really hot. This is really hot stuff. We're going to go ahead and pour some in a narrow jar. And we're going to use one of our tools called a hydrometer, which basically tests the density of the fluid. I'm going to put a little more in there. This is a little foamy. This is the last of the season, and it's usually your thickest, strongest flavored syrup. It's really my favorite, but it's really considered the least quality. Okay, so if the hydrometer, floats within this bubble, the thick set on the bottom, that tells you that your liquid is at a density that that's good. It's ready. When it cools, and that's why we don't know just by looking at it, it thickens as it cools. So we measured it. I'm going to go ahead and take this hydrometer and put it over in the sink, let it cool off, and then wash it. So this continues to be really hot. So we're going to go ahead, and because it's so hot, we can actually preserve it without running it through a bath, what's called a cold water bath, which is a canning process. But I'll show you how. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to get that jar out of the way. That was just a testing jar. And these are canning jars, rims and seals. If you've never canned before, it's all part of a canning process. And I'm just going to, now, I don't want to forget an important step here, which I almost did, and that's the final filtering of it. And this is the filter form, and there's different kinds, but this is a paper filter you can get at any restaurant supply company. And basically what you're going to do before you fill the jars, and this, when it gets so thick, the end of the season stuff, this can take a while and can go through a number of filters. Luckily you can wash those out and reuse them. Let them dry and reuse them. We're going to go ahead and run the final. It's coming out fairly quickly because I have to tell you I pre-filtered this so it would go quicker for you. The last syrup is thick. It has a lot of, I'm guessing, wood granules starting to form, and it's a pretty long process just getting it to go through the filter. But because I filtered it once already, I can show you this fairly quickly. So this is the second filtering. The first one, if you can remember, was from our first side where Colleen was gathering the sap and taking it into the country kitchen, the outdoor kitchen. So once we get enough filtered, we're going to go ahead and fill one of our quart jars all the way to where the rim begins. Going to leave about a half inch space there, and that's so that we can create a vacuum. As this jar cools, a vacuum is created in there that actually preserves it. Because it's so hot I can hardly touch it, I'm hand tightening this and I'm inverting it so that the entire jar will heat up for about 5 minutes, and then I will turn it back over, and then as the jar cools, the suction will then make a tight fit so that we won't have any airflow. And syrup also can be frozen. It actually doesn't freeze, but you can store it in your freezer. The sugar content is so high that it doesn't freeze, but it does store well in your freezer. So if you have a lot of room in your freezer, that's another way to do it. But once this is turned over, and I'll do it before 5 minutes just to show you, it'll cool, we'll wash the jar off, and then I'll store it in a dark cupboard in a basement or a canning cupboard if you have it. But that is the finishing process for the syrup, and this is our last gallon of the season. And we're able to keep our season going really past our sap collecting time because we have big barrels that we've been collecting it in and keeping it cold, because home production is very slow compared to the sugar houses. So, signing off from Bertrand Farm, and see you next year with more sap.